Our journey has taken us from being to life to consciousness and self-awareness. And what we've learned is that everything is interdependent. Everything is leaning on everything else. And each of us are experiencing the same thing inside with this interdependent, ever-present happening. We can see that everything is inextricably connected. And that's pretty much been proven, from quantum physics all the way to environment and ecology. Everything is interdependent and connected. So it should be as no surprise that this is the case with our own thinking as well. And that's what the inner work is really about. Freud first pulled on this thread of interconnected thought through the process called free association. And that word association is going to be prevalent in today's podcast. Associations, free associations. Most know about what free associations are. The therapist or somebody will say a word, and then we say the first thing that comes into our mind, and we don't think about it. We just say it. So if someone says mother, maybe you say care. Maybe you say, ooh, scary. Maybe you say warmth or nurturing. The whole key is to not have any time, to just go ahead and say what the first thing that comes to mind. And this gives a little indication of an unconscious piece of us. Well, what we've learned and what I've learned is that it goes so much deeper. Every conscious thought is connected to an array of associations that include the whole mind. Think about that. Not just the whole mind, but your whole history. Every thought is connected to the whole, and in my mind, a huge spiritual intent is learning to track our thoughts within our minds, our souls, and to see how they are deeper unconscious connections, and that they create everything from unconscious bias to unconscious anxieties and fears and joys and loves. And this is part of our journey, in my mind at least. And to track our associations, to allow pathways for unconscious intent to become conscious, is a large part of the spiritual journey. And to uncover our own unconscious bias is to grow in deep and abiding ways. And I think that is so important. So important. Now, I will say this. My wife and I, we like playing Jeopardy, and this is what kind of gave me a key, not to mention all the psychedelic experiences I've had. But sometimes a question will be asked, and Edie will just come up with an answer. And I go, there's no way you know that answer. How did you know that answer? She just trusted her internal associations. It's amazing how in Jeopardy you can see you know the answer to something, even though you don't know the answer. It behooves me, but it makes sense, because what we're doing is we're pulling on a whole series of associations and connections, and something unconscious, a process, just kind of delivers the right answer. Now, how this happened, that's a good question. But in my journey, I've found that these associations have allowed me to take when I allow them to take their full course, they take me back to the beginning. I have to say I first saw this on psychedelics, and to me, a life goal has been to be able to track these and trace them without being on psychedelics, which is not easy because the front brain is very big, and it definitely gets in its own way. But how do we get back to the beginning? How do we trace a thought, a feeling, all the way back? It goes back to our family of origin. And I'll tell you, if you're not doing your family of origin work, you're not doing your work. It also can pull you back to specific traumas or life-changing experiences, a birth, a death. This is part and parcel of, in my world, of my inner work. And to have a sense of our origins and the experiences, trauma or otherwise, again, marriage, kids, sorrow, and joy, is to have a deeper and fuller sense of who we are and the intent and impetus of our own being. And I think that, again, is central to the spiritual journey. So my point today is that every thought is connected to a cascading event of associations. I mean, every word you hear is part of that. And by paying attention to the connections, we can learn not just of our bias, but of our loves, our pains, and our joys. And we can take the power away from those painful, hidden aspects and work on finding ways to heal by evoking these unconscious pieces that are impeding our moving with the court of the one. And I have to say, my experience with music has helped me with this. There's a whole concept called overtones or harmonic structure. When you hear a note on the piano, you're not just hearing that note. You're hearing the note, which is the bass. You're hearing an octave, which is built into the overtones. You're hearing a fourth above that octave. You're hearing a fifth above that, which makes it the second octave. And there are a number of overtones that create this note on a piano or a guitar. And in synthesizers, they came up with pure tones without all those, and then they had to rebuild them into what a violin sounds like. It's amazing how all that has come together. But what we see is, just as a note has a harmonic structure, every thought also does. So today, how can we open ourselves to these unconscious connections that make up the bulk of who we are? How can we learn to become more aware of our unconscious intent? And when you look at racism and gender fears and misogyny and laziness and our hate and our self-hate, oh my gosh, where do they come from? How do you do it? You have to pull on those threads. And part of therapy, of course, is learning to do that so that we can heal, so that we can grow, so that we can individuate and become our true selves to find our truest path, our Dharma. Now, I have to say that one of the threads that I pulled on, because one of the things I hated in early life was saying I was going to do something right before I did not do it. And it was my own laziness. And pulling on that thread, and it took me years to do this, to the family of origin, I finally got it. If you look at me and you wag your finger at me and tell me I'm never going to get it right, I'll probably tear up. Because, see, that's a basic thing that I learned very early in life. And if I'm not going to get it right, why even try at all? That was the basis of my own laziness. And once I got there, I was able to put my finger on me. And I could see that, I had been brought up in school by people telling me I was stupid, I was dumb, I was a fool, I was an idiot, and I was never going to get it right. Wow. I'll tell you, that was a liberation for me. And it also freed me up to move in the direction of my Dharma, of my truest self, so that I could become me. So today, these associations, whoa, what are they really? How do we not impede ourselves so that we might see these associations, so that we might find a way? Now, for me, contemplation and music are ways to do that. Stories are ways to do that. I think the stories, some what we're getting is leading us right around a tight end around our own bias so that we can see the root of it. What are the things that impede it? We distract ourselves. Again, this is the other side of stories. Stories can also liberate us, but they can also distract us. So the other one is denial. To me, distraction and denial are the two greatest impediments to our inner work. Contemplation, music, dance, movement, walking, all of those things can churn up unconscious content. And if we are aware enough, we can see it and catch it. And from it, we can grow. Now, having said all this, I would like to say I'm glad to be back. This is our 304th Deep End. And today is 9/26/23. And my two co-hosts, Mary Ann Ruddis, coming from Spokane Valley, Bob Hayes, coming from over there in Florida, the beat-up state, if I may say. This whole concept of association, it's been a few weeks that I've been reflecting on this, and to lay hold of one's own internal state of affairs and to see the seething and churning and interconnecting of all these things, it can be overwhelming. At the same time, it can be liberating. So I'll start with you, Mary Ann. I just laid out a whole bunch of my own personal stuff as well as what I consider to be primary inner work. What say you on this?
Well, I think there's absolutely a lot of truth here. Everything that we hear and say goes through our own internal baggage to figure out what does that mean? What are we trying to say? I'm always striving for precision in language because I know that what I say and what is heard can sometimes be very different. And our communication is really hard because of that. So you used an example in the very beginning of the word mother. And so as we're talking with people and we speak that word, we're being aware that everyone is going to come at that from a different place. And it makes it very, very hard for us to understand other people at sometimes. So I think by doing our own work, by understanding what those words mean for us and using your terminology there of pulling at the threads, of going back and tracing and I'm in the middle of doing some really, really deep stuff right now. Today happens to be the anniversary of my son's passing. And so just even having a date like that and the associations of the day and what is going through me and through all of the words that I hear are, and I'm very aware, are being filtered through these experiences that I've had. And so I think that when we do our own work, then that frees us up to be able to really understand or really listen to another person's words and what it is that they are trying to communicate, because we are all connected and we're just trying to figure things out. So I think for me, this whole topic of association is, let's pay attention to what we're thinking and what's happening, and be aware of the fact that what someone else says may not have anything to do with the way you're hearing it, and what you're saying may not have anything to do with the way they're hearing it. And so I think our task of community is figuring out how do we communicate? What was it? Wittgenstein said, language is a tailor shop where nothing fits. Well, I think that's because we all have our own sizes for all of these things. So that's my take.
And if you look at that Wittgenstein point, I mean, we all have the clothing we wear is our associations. The bundle of, Jung called the mother a complex. It's built out of all these pieces of experience and associations. And to get a bead on those archetypes of those aspects that make up our being, I think that's a huge part of the spiritual journey. Bob, what say you on this?
Well, I'm going to start out by saying you gave me too much time to think about this because we've been off for a couple of weeks. I could write 3 dissertations just on what you discussed in the last 5 minutes. No, seriously, associations are the basis of all learning and memory. How many times have we experienced, well, I'm trying to think of somebody's name. I think it starts with an M. Oh, no, it starts with a C, and so forth. And once you get that association, then that leads to others. But the thing is, we've talked about unconscious forces that mold our behavior, whether they be biases or whether they be our attachment to certain complexes. And we've also talked about semi-permeability in terms of what we allow in. And it's largely unconscious forces that control that semi-permeability. And not just letting something in from outside, but letting something in from our input mechanisms to our central processing mechanisms like memory and like our motivations and so forth that lead us to certain behaviors. So associations are the basis of all of it. And I think you were right on, Red Hawk, in terms of doing the inner work to bring these associations more into our own conscious control. Because until we can do that, then we're at the mercy of these biases and these experiences that we've had. So, yeah, you mentioned stories, you mentioned music. There are a number of tools that have been invented over the years. I'll just use tarot cards as one example. There's a lot of different ways to use them, but they can help us focus in on certain associations, complexes, if we want to use that term, that we have that are slowing us down. And until we're able to identify those, it's very difficult to make changes, to let in new information that we don't block consciously or unconsciously. So, yeah, I think that really this whole idea of trying to learn where our associations come from and tracing them back. Another tool might be the I Ching. Another tool might be just meditation and letting thoughts flow one to another. So, once we've made the decision that we are going to do inner work, then we can choose from a whole quiver of different types of tools that will help us along that path.
Well, as y'all were speaking, I was thinking how gravity bends space. You know what I mean? The same way experience bends associations. And that these places, Marion, you talk about the passing of your child, it's not just in time, but it's also within the fabric of your own associations and soul and mind. And there's definitely a dimple, if you will, in those associations, which draws you into that as you approach these times. And I think that that's a really good way of thinking about it. And I also think that, in my own life, I can give you an example. My parents are very loving, okay? Very loving, both my mom and my dad. However, I still got pissed at my dad a lot. And I'm not talking about adolescent stuff. I'm talking about something was there. So I started pulling on that thread. And you know what it was? Is he is so good at compartmentalizing that it turned into denial. And that denial infected our whole family. It repressed my mom that I never got to see until she was on her deathbed and probably on morphine. So she started sharing some of this stuff about, not being able to be herself and to share aspects of herself because my dad was so good at compartmentalizing. My brother and sister, my sister's brilliant at it. My brother tried, and I think it ended up killing him. So these threads, when I started seeing what was really my family of origin, that it was full of love and full of all this wonderful stuff, but it was also full of denial, which kept me from parts of myself. I'll tell you, those were liberating, and those threads, those aspects, I still have those associations sometimes now, but when I have them, I go, wow, there it is again. There's my family of origin stuff. It's sitting right in front of my mind. Is that a trip that I can look at that and make aware these unconscious things that have been forces in my life? And I'll tell you, that to me, that's liberating. That's spiritual healing. As Ram Dass said, if you do your inner work, the monsters don't go away, but they eventually can become little shmoes that you can have into tea. And I think that's the journey I'm on. That these parts of me that have been denied because of aspects in my family of origin, to allow them still to come into my life and go, well, look at that son of a bitch, that little schmo. But you don't have power over me anymore. And to me, that is what the spiritual journey is about, to empower. Marianne, you talk about your child's death. That can be debilitating or empowering, depending on the kind of way you surround it. You know what I mean? The associations that you are honest about and your feelings and everything. And I think that's why truth is so important, to own our own stuff. And I guess that's big in my life because of that denial piece in my family, that I just don't want to deny shit. I want to face it head on, even if it hurts, even if I am implicated in the darkness that might have been propagated by it, become part of that. Those are hard truths to own, but I'll tell you what, that's where liberation is and has been in my life.
And, because they are hard truths, that's why they're mostly unconscious, because we have mechanisms that keep them unconscious. And that's where the work is, to uncover them, to pull the thread, as you say. And that is liberating. Sorry, Marianne, I kind of jumped on.
Oh, no, that's, yeah. Well, I think one of the things is those things are with us all our lives, those experiences. And you're right, you see them differently if you are brave enough to look at them and to go in and we just did a bereaved parents retreat this weekend, and there is times when you have to protect yourself. You have to pull that back, but to keep, and I really think this is a lifelong thing, right? We're going to be doing this all our lives, and I think that was one of the things that, to say that the experiences that I've had in my life can be empowering. It takes a long time to get there, and it takes a lot of work to get there. But it's true, and it's and on certain days it's better than others. But there are things that shape us in our lives, and going back, and right now I'm going back to some very early things that have shaped the way I see the world and shaped the way that I view myself, and trying to unravel all of that. It is the idea of associations is really important, and coming up with, okay, my friend asked me, so what color does that bring up for you when you hear those words? And I was like, color? What are you talking about, right? But then when I started to really dig into that and go, oh, wait, that's making me feel like a purple. And then associating that with experiences and things, it does lead you to places that you wouldn't normally go, to kind of free associate and let yourself go there. But you have to have the space, you have to have the time to be able to do that. So I think that's part of what happens right now. We're so busy, and everybody is on the go constantly, that we don't have time to really sit back and reflect. And I think that's something that if we can build more of that into our lives, we're going to be able to have the little shmoes in for tea, right? but without that contemplation, without that period of being able to really dig into it and being brave enough to do that, because you're right, we want to protect ourselves, especially if it's ugly. Yeah, I mean, just it is a healing journey, and I think we're all on that.
Yeah. And, something that you both said makes me think that we never get over anything, but we can get through things. And there's a big difference. I'm finally over that. Well, how'd you process it? I didn't have to process it. I just decided I was done. Yeah, right. So how's that going to pop up in your life in some other weird way? And I want people to see something from this podcast. Our associations, they're talking to us. If we look at the myth of psyche is it's talking to us. The whole ball of wax is present in every thought. No thought is autonomous. It's all connected into one big mumbo jumbo, interconnected ball of seething somethings. We don't even know what.
All confusion, Red Hawk.
Sometimes, but I think that it looks like chaos from the outside, but when you start pulling the threads, you see the rational aspect of the chaos that you're describing and where it comes from. And speaking of time, by the way, because I think you said it, Marianne, we don't take the time because we don't have the time. The world has got so many demands on us. But one thing I know is in the last 3 weeks, this has been the quickest half hour I have lived. Bob, final comments on the inner work of associations?
Well, I think that the most important first step is to realize that these associations exist. And yeah, you're right, Marianne, we're busy, we're getting on with our lives. But as we get along with our lives, if that little, I'll call it another association, if that little association with the fact that we are in a web of associations, some of which cause biases, some of which we need to try and find our way through them in order to get at whatever truth the experience is that we are involved with. I think we can do both. We can get on with our lives, and as we're doing that, we can bring that little, it's been called the still small voice, it's been called all sorts of different things. But the idea that there is a way to tweak our associations to make our passage smoother, better, more in sync with the one.
Amen. And that's called health, by the way. Marianne, final comments?
Well, as you were talking, Bob, I kept thinking about patterns. And it's like if we start to notice the patterns in our lives and things that keep repeating, and if they're good patterns, then we're happy. But if they are bad patterns or things that have less than optimal results, then we can I think that's an end. We can start looking at, okay, why do I keep repeating these same patterns? And once you kind of get into that and you get into those associations, then you can start to think new thoughts. You can start to explore new ideas. But I think noticing those is a good first step.
And as you were saying that, we end up overcoming their unconscious forces and become more intentional with our conscious forces. And I think that you both have touched upon something that is really important to me, and that's wanting to feel safe. People cover stuff up because they don't feel safe. People are conflicted because they don't feel safe, and I know people who don't want to be anywhere around anything that's conflictual because it upsets them, and they don't feel safe. So what is this whole thing about feeling safe? Even in our associations, we end up cutting parts of ourselves out because they're uncomfortable, they're painful, they make us feel like we're anxious and not safe. That word safe is important because that's where we're going to go with our next podcast. It has to do with security. How do we feel secure? This week I looked up the first armies. We're talking 5,000 before the Common Era. These armies started rising, and it was an amazing thing, the rise of armies. And it wasn't just security. It was security that was based on, we got to get them before they get us. We got to take their resources so we have enough food. We need to take their resources so we can have enough metal to make more swords, to create more armies, to have more security. It's over and over this aspect of us, of the human being, that just, and we all want to be safe, to be secure, but there's something evolutionary that we have to overcome here if we're going to be a species that survives. How do we deal with that? What does that mean? Till then, my friends, blessings, and in all things, may you be open.